Hey there, welcome to Simply Real Estate, and I am your host, Todd C. Slater. Joining me today in the studio, I'm so thrilled to have two, veteran real estate investors joining me. It's a real pleasure to be able to welcome both Shailesh and Sharon. And guys, welcome to the podcast booth.
Thank you for having us.
So glad to be here.
It's a real pleasure finally getting some investors here. As you know, I know you catch my show kind of regularly, and we have the ability of bringing on, different experts and different people in the industry. But, I'm really thrilled to have you here today to be able to talk about being real estate investors. Right. And, Shailesh, I'll start off with you.
Sure.
A lot of people kind of wonder, what's the motivation to become a real estate investor?
Yeah, I think for us, one of the things that really motivated us to become real estate investors was building upon our wealth. Like we built our foundational wealth through our investments and built that, and that was really good for us. And then it was taking it to the next level. And real estate was one of those components that was doing very, very well as an asset class category. And I attended one of your sessions, your seminars way back in the day, and it made complete sense. It was about starting off with one and growing it at a slow pace and slow rate, similar to growing your investments. It's very a long-term journey. And that's really what we wanted to do with our real estate investments and grow it. And eventually we grew it to the point where we're comfortable with what we have. And now we're growing the next generational wealth with our kids.
Wow.
And so
I love hearing generational wealth. And Sharon, so, one of the things that when Shailesh mentions generational wealth and start growing for your kids, one of the things that I think a lot of real estate investors do understand is that everything should be looked at more long-term. When you first started, and maybe you can tell us how long that you've been investing in real estate, and then, why so long?
So we started with you, Todd. That would have been seven years ago.
Yeah.
And we did not think of the next generation because then our kids were much younger. They are young adults to teens right now, and we are thinking of them. We are thinking of what they need, even though they don't know it themselves, of what's next, right?
Sure.
So that's our job as parents to guide them.
Yeah. I love that because there's so many people that, everybody has, I think, a reason to start becoming a real estate investor. And, Shailesh, as Sharon said, you've been a simple investor now for over 7 years. Right. We won't quite talk about that journey yet, but, in the very beginning, were you nervous about becoming a real estate investor? Because I know there's a lot of horror stories that float around out there.
Yes, absolutely. It was about, how can I do this? What sort of things do I need to know? And that was a challenge back then, 7 years ago, where there was not a lot of information as there is today. But so I needed guidance, and it was great to go to your seminar because you made it very simple. You managed the properties, you did everything. We've never missed a rent payment at all. And that's something that we always look forward to from our perspective, because we're still fully employed full time and we love what we do, but now we have the option of choice. And for us, we didn't want to be actively trying to manage a property or anything of that nature. We wanted to be very hands off. And that's really what Simple Investor has done for us.
Yeah.
If I can pipe in,
Sure.
like from your question, Todd, I was very uncomfortable at the start. Shailesh was way more comfortable because of his background, his educational background and financial background, and he had to convince me. I come from a background where you study, you get a job, you succeed in your career, and that's the only opportunity on your plate of different products, like a food plate.
Sure. Yeah. It's interesting that you bring that up because that's become very, very, I think, trendy right now when people talk about, having a job and you're kind of setting yourself up kind of on a certain path. And one of the things, and I've seen your path change over the years, as you said, in the very beginning, you were looking for yourselves to have some complementary security, wealth, things like that. But now as the time goes on, we now recognize the next generation, we need to help them because, 7 years, when I look back at 7 years, just so you know, when we look back at some of your first investments. I mean, the prices, the mindset back then, and I can go back since we started 13 years ago. But when we take a look at the 7 years, it's amazing what's happened. But it's amazing also what has now happened, and I'd almost call it a little detrimental to the youth. Prices have soared. Jobs are not really competing with the cost of living, and how do we help them? And maybe you can tell us what the first step you did to help your kids.
Again, they don't know what they don't know, just like when we were much younger. So the first start point is to educate them. Simple. Open up a bank account with them. If you're giving them their allowance, put it in that account, help them understand they can either save, they can invest that money, and how very little interest you get if you let it just sit in that account.
Sure.
And that's at a very junior age. As they learn themselves and we can educate them more, and through the school systems as well, we teach them other pieces, and that's where Shailesh's expertise will come in, from his wealth management experience.
Sure.
Yeah.
So, Shailesh, when we talk about wealth management, obviously, you had talked earlier about, if you're doing investments, and, we know that, obviously real estate is one avenue that people pursue, but we can also look at other avenues for, people look at stocks, they look at mutual funds, they look at different ways of investing. Right. But I think the world shakeup over the last few years, like COVID, I think has redefined people's mindset. And, one of the things, of course, I'm a big believer in is that everybody needs a roof over their head.
Yes.
Not everybody's going to have a mutual fund.
Right.
So when we talk about big pictures, this is why, everybody knows, obviously I'm steadfast with real estate investment. But for yourself, do you find that you kind of have both mindsets? Because I know that you are invested in multiple platforms.
Right. Yes.
Do you look at each other, or you just kind of say, okay, this is going to perform this way, or is this one going to perform this way?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think both of them complement each other. So even in investments, you can invest in real estate through real estate investment trusts and things of that nature. But I look at it from where we were to where we want to be. So we built that foundational through mutual funds and regular everyday type of investments. And then we migrated or advanced ourselves to real estate, and I'm doing options trading and things of that nature. So those come with time and also with the money that comes with it as well, taking on a little bit more risk with age. And with knowledge, of course. And so those are some of the things that complement each other. So I found that both the real estate investment and the investments really complemented what we did.
Yeah.
And I love the best of both worlds. Like I had very much a passion for investments because that's where my background was in 27 years in the investment industry. But then I also love the real estate aspect and looking at the deals and looking at the financing of those deals as well. So I say if I can mirror both of them together, I love the best of both worlds. And that's pretty much what I do on a regular basis now.
So Sharon, you watch this teeter-totter, I'm sure, and some markets don't do so well. And then of course, we've had a little bit of upward pressure with interest rates. So everybody kind of like, whoa, wait a minute. And, if you do a gut check, how do you feel about that?
Well, if you look at it just from a simple plate of food, you're supposed to have your carbs, more veg, and a little bit of protein, right? And then you go on different diets, you pull things off and on the plate. It's like that from a wealth management perspective. You have to know what your goal is. Mm-hmm. And some people have different goals. We just have to remember that and use different strategies, which are the different food components on that plate. I just want to use that analogy, pull things off your plate at certain times, like during COVID, or when the interest rates are high. Right. You use different strategies.
Yeah. I mean, that's a great analogy. And just for our listeners' sake, I'm a carnivore more or less. I eat just steak, and that's my real estate. So I don't have a diverse plate like you do, Sharon, just so you know. I'm more of a meat eater. But, it does make a lot of sense. And I think for people, all their eggs in one basket is never a good thing unless you're actually the person that is, like ourselves, where we're just actively doing it every single day. Like this is our life. We live and breathe real estate. But I do like like the balance effect. It's what I think is, though, are people's expectations. So when you take a look at your portfolio, Shailesh, if we talk about your real estate portfolio, I know the numbers that we had talked about 7 years ago. I think we've more than surpassed those as far as value. And listen, that's the benefit of a good real estate market, and the fact that we don't have enough inventory. We can't produce enough real estate. So quite frankly, I think we were at the right time, but I would have to say that your expectation has been exceeded just for your real estate portfolio.
Absolutely. Yeah. Completely exceeded expectations. And one of the things I liked about the entry level with the simple investor was, at the time, it was very minimal. You weren't spending millions of dollars. It was under 100,000. I think our first property that we bought was almost 90,000, right?
90,000,
so that was affordable.
Yeah.
And that was in Listowel, Ontario. So I think operating in the smaller markets really helps with entry levels or having people get into it. And also the model where you're not spending millions of dollars, you're buying a component or a small component of, that's 100,000, 200,000, 300, something a little more affordable so you can get into it.
Yeah.
And then you buy for the long term. And so eventually you start to pay down your debt and you work the numbers out and it becomes more favorable later on.
Refinance and
Yeah.
then
There you go.
Yeah.
monopoly effect.
Yeah.
Repeat.
Yeah. It's a long-term strategy and it's working extremely well for us.
Yeah. So Sharon, talk to me about the refinance. I saw your face light up, and it's one of those things that I tell people, let it pay itself down, let the value go up, take a little bit of money out, we can rinse and repeat. Have you felt that? Have you been able to see that?
Yes, absolutely. So let's use the $90,000 property from 7 years ago. Yes, we've paid much of it down, and you can refi that. Say we paid 50,000 off, refi, and you get that 50,000, and you use that to repeat, buy another property.
Yeah. And this is the one thing that I think that a lot of people, it almost sounds too good to be true, and this is one of the things that I think that was one of I'll say hurdles for yourself, because when we look back at it, a lot of people, in the early days used to say to me, well, it sounds too good to be true. There's got to be a catch. And, how do you overcome a hurdle with something like that?
To overcome that hurdle, it's really the mindset. I had to change my mindset. If I wanted to become a little bit more wealthy, I had to change my mindset and think of there's other strategies to put on that plate and use different strategies.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's always good debt and bad debt. And, when you look at a lot of the wealthy individuals, they take on debt, the good debt, to grow and expand. And that's one of the reasons why many companies have a CFO in place, because they're borrowing to grow and expand, and you just manage that debt accordingly.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great comment, is that, good and bad debt. Bad debt, I think most people know Visa cards. Good debt, mortgages when on the right properties.
Right.
Let's talk about speculation for a second, because, one of the hot topics, and you see, the nice thing is I know that you actually have a very diverse, knowledge of real estate, because you don't just work with Simple Investor, but you are constantly questing and to understand things better. And,
right.
and, I've never been a speculator. A lot of people turn around and they want to do that quick fix. And I'm always concerned about that.
Right.
How do you stop yourself from doing something like that?
Yeah, great question. So when we look at deals or investments on real estate, we look at it from a cash flow perspective. We look at the numbers first and make sure it makes sense from a financial perspective or the cash flow perspective. We don't take into account market appreciation. We keep that off the table. And so whenever we look at deals, we say, okay, are we at least breaking even?
Right.
And then the market appreciation is extra gravy on top of that. But, and then we, of course, take a look at the market environment of the place or location that we're looking at and see how the economics of that area is. But it's all looking at the numbers first and cash flow first and foremost.
Yeah.
And each real estate investor has their own strategies. Some actually include that appreciation, which I consider like a bonus to your salary,
Yep.
as part of their numbers. We don't.
Right.
Yeah.
We take a more conservative approach.
Yeah, and I mean, when you do your math, I mean, even if you're at break even, you're at least getting a 10% return on your money based on mortgage paydown.
Yes.
And that's that little piece that people forget. And when you say 10%, based on your down payment, people say, well, it's not a lot of money, but it adds up.
It does.
I think most people, if you were if you're a betting person and you look at stocks, and if you could say, well, I can guarantee myself 10% return on all my money invested every single year,
Right.
they're going to call you Warren Buffett.
Right. Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
You
Yes.
know, and again, that's kind of far and few between. Let's talk about things such as, RSPs, for example.
Sure.
Okay. I know that, again, we're talking about diversity. When you take a look at RSPs, I consider them a tax deferral system.
Right.
Okay. What do you consider them?
Yeah, absolutely. It's very much a tax deferral system, completely. Yeah, because when you invest in it, everyone's looking to save money or get a tax refund by investing in the RSPs, 100%.
Right.
Yeah.
So, Sharon, when you look at it, I know some people utilize that as a safety net, but here comes my little rant on RSPs, and you two can jump in at any time. My concern is that it's still government managed, right? And we've gone through a pretty tough economical time, and I'm concerned, and don't quote me, but I'm concerned that it's going to cost more to take out your RSPs. I think there's going to be more fees. I think there's going to be percentages and taxes that are going to go up when you start to utilize them when you need them.
Right.
What do you think?
Yeah, there's speculation on that. That could happen. It also may not happen. But we have to use history to predict the future. And we have seen that change in the past. So most likely, speculation-wise, it will change in the future. Yes, it's a tax deferral. You can put in less now and so use some of that money as part of your plate of components for your wealth management strategy.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's great. So when we talk about, future retirement, things like that, do you keep your assets long term? Do you start thinking of unwinding and selling them? What is your strategy?
Yeah, so I think our strategy is to unwind them, but unwind it in a tax-friendly manner, right? So there's a lot of things called the Smith maneuver that you can use, or unwinding your RSPs in a favorable manner where, we'll go into different strategies, but there's a lot of tax deferral or tax favorable ways of unwinding that. And when we look at our estates, that's something that we kind of keep in the back of my mind is how do we transfer that to the next generation in a tax-friendly environment or tax-friendly way, but at the same time still growing our portfolio in a tax-friendly manner as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, absolutely agree with trying to unwind it in a tax-friendly manner.
Yeah. So when I talk about, looking at the future and the next generation, I always, one of the things I've always encouraged is that if you're going to own multiple properties, I'm a big fan of people obviously having holding companies.
Yes.
The idea that at a later date, we bring our kids into those, which allows them to have some form of ownership. It makes it a little bit easier transition. We can look at trusts that we can set it up in.
Yes.
I've always said to people, I never believe in selling, real estate.
Right.
Because no matter what, 20, 30, 40, 50 years down the road, everybody's still going to need a roof. And it's funny, we had a conversation off air about, technology and iPhones and everything that people utilize.
Yes.
But as much as technology is incredible, it still can't change the necessity for a roof over your head.
Right.
We're coming into a situation here in Canada, and again, I know the two of you are, you're very up with what's happening, on a daily basis of what's happening in the world. Canada is throwing in a whole bunch of new immigration, and I will agree that we definitely need immigration here to help the country grow.
Right.
The problem is that when you increase the immigration at the level that they're doing, where are you going to put the people?
Right.
Okay.
Yes.
And so what's your take on that? Because quite frankly, I look at it and say, we're creating even a worse housing shortage.
Right. Yeah. No, and it's something that we own student rentals as well. And during COVID, we saw how it was favorable to us to own those student rentals because we were catering to international markets or international students, whereas our own kids were at home during COVID studying from home. And so it worked well from that perspective. But as a real estate investors, if we didn't have those international students, we would have been out of pocket trying to hold on to those student rentals. So I agree with you. The immigration is definitely important, but where can we put all of those individuals? That's the challenge. And it was interesting. I was listening to a news is 92.5 FM, and they were talking about Ukrainians where they're moving into central Manitoba and also Regina, Saskatchewan. So pockets of information, and those surrounding regions are benefiting from having those types of individuals in there as well. So I think that's where we can have those allocations of individuals in certain communities where they wouldn't necessarily grow. And we see that with the Atlantic region where they're now growing, and real estate is becoming a lot more popular there as well as real estate investors. So I think that component of having immigration helps with that in different regions of Canada.
And to add on to that, we are in a labor crisis in Canada. Domestic personnel, we can't find workers here. So we have to go abroad to get workers. So when they come here, we have to house them. So the real estate market, in whatever form, commercial, private, has to be developed and has to be enhanced for that to help the labor market piece.
Yeah, and when we talk about numbers, okay, because just to throw out some basic numbers, so we've got 1.5 million new immigrants coming in the next 3 years. Right now, the government is saying that potentially they're going to build 450,000 homes. Now, I'll just get rid of that myth. It's never going to happen. Right. They can't build 50,000 a year, so that's not going to happen. So now we were going to have 1.5 million people needing a place to reside. The pressure right now on the rental market, okay, is becoming very, very difficult. Right? And, vacancies, especially in the main cores. You touched on something that I thought was very interesting when we talk about some of the outer, cities in Canada.
Right.
Would it behoove us to turn around and actually say, for a portion of the new immigrants, we need to start populating some of the smaller cities, the ones that could use, a new workforce?
Yes. I completely agree with it. It will kickstart their economies and help them grow as well. And it also brings new skill sets to those communities. And those are things that we can definitely, especially those smaller communities, can definitely benefit from. 100%.
Yeah. I mean, we've got a world-class city when we talk about, Calgary, for example.
Yes.
But right now, mass vacancy in the commercial part because just a lot of companies moved.
Yes.
And, they've all, we can't complain in Ontario with Toronto being, one of the biggest cities in the world.
Right.
But there are other ones that are lagging here in Canada, but they're very viable cities. They have infrastructure in place. They've got the structures in place.
Right.
And, and it's funny because we kind of see the flavor of the month happening in real estate,
Right.
And I know it's interesting because, investors like yourselves, every once in a while reach out and say, hey, Todd, are you going to buy anything out west? Right. And I'm glad we haven't gone to some of those markets because we'd be having a tough time, but vacancies are through the roof in, let's say, Alberta in certain cases.
Yes.
To the point where now the province of Alberta advertises on the radio to migrate that way.
Yes.
And so, can we balance? I guess my biggest question is how do we balance the number of people coming in versus what we're up against?
Right. Yeah. And we actually used to live in Calgary. So we know at firsthand what that looks like. And when we were I was looking at commercial properties in Calgary as well. But a lot of the developers there are now retrofitting the commercial units to become housing units, and they're getting government subsidies to do that. Yeah. So it's kind of in their best interest. But yeah, you're absolutely right. With more and more people working from home, a lot of commercial properties are becoming vacant, and now they're trying to retrofit them so that they can become housing units as well.
Yeah. So I'm just going to ask you, just a couple of last thoughts.
Sure.
Do you anything you want to add for our listeners?
Yeah, I think when it comes down to real estate or just investing in general, it's not a quick fix. You're not going to get there quickly. It's a journey that's going to take time. And when we look at it for years, and we're looking at it for the next generation, our kids and their kids eventually. So I think the model that we've incorporated with the Simple Investor has helped us down that journey as well. And like I said, it's worked well for us, and we want to thank you for that, because as passive investors, we love what we do full time, and it allows us to enjoy time with our family and let you do the heavy lifting. So thank you for that.
And Sharon, any last comments?
I would suggest that everyone thinks of their own goal, use your own strategy or strategies for that, and use Simple Investor, because we tried your approach, Todd, 7 years ago, and we have become very successful at it. And thank you for inviting us.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been an absolute pleasure. And folks, as I said at the very beginning, it's just wonderful to finally have some investors join us here at the studio. And don't worry, we're going to keep you up to date on what's happening in the world of real estate. And I just want to thank Sharon and Shailesh for joining me today. And that's our quick wrap for Simply Real Estate. I'm your host, Todd C. Slater.